The search for Chicago's top cop is nearing its final steps. Chicago's Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability will host its final meeting, the final community forum on the search for the city's next police superintendent. That's happening on Monday at 6 o'clock over at the Beverly Arts Center over on the city's south side. To gather public comment on the search, some 52 candidates actually applied for that big position, one of the world's largest metropolitan police departments. That search coming following the March retirement of Superintendent David Brown, retiring at 62 years old just months before reaching the age of 63. That's the mandatory retirement age for Chicago police officers. He was nominated to the role in 2020 by now outgoing Mayor Lori Lightfoot, the two working closely together, embracing a strategy of flooding Chicago's most violent areas with additional officers, violence interrupters, and other city resources. But his tenure was a little rocky after setting some lofty goals to lower the city's homicide rate, but violence only growing, as did the number of homicides in Chicago. Under outgoing Mayor Lori Lightfoot's tenure, Chicago recorded 2,784 homicides and a total of 14,681 shooting incidents, according to police data from 2019 up until this month, right now in the month of May. The number of homicides in Chicago hitting a 25-year high in 2021 with 804, that according to the Chicago Police Department. Now to talk a little bit more about the politics and the search ongoing there in the Windy City, I want to bring in Anthony Driver. He's the president of the commission now tasked with providing those 3 nominations to incoming Mayor Brandon Johnson by July the 14th. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us this morning here on Live Now from Fox. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Thanks so much. As a former student over at Roosevelt University in Chicago, I certainly have some interest there in public affairs happening there in the city. And we obviously know this is such an important position, not just for the city of Chicago, but also for other cities looking at what police departments are going to do next, especially in these major metropolitan areas. I first want to kind of get your reaction and just some kind of background on, these numbers that we talk about in terms of violent crimes, especially there in Chicago. What concerns you the most, and what does that tell you about the necessity and what the Chicago Police Department should be doing today to tackle those things, as well as those ongoing changes and what the community believes policing should be?
Yeah, I think it shows, the struggle that our city has been going through for quite a while now, where residents don't feel safe. Residents don't feel safe pumping gas, going to the grocery store. But I also think it shows, a tremendous opportunity for new leadership to come in and actually chart a new path where residents of Chicago actually do feel safe, in conjunction with community organizations who are also working very hard to prevent crime and violence in the city of Chicago.
Absolutely. And Anthony, the violent crime there's been intense movement in recent years across America really to change the way that policing kind of really goes. What is the role to you of the Chicago Police Department today?
Yeah, so ideally, the Chicago Police Department will play a role in preventing crime, but also catching folks after they commit crime. It's no secret that, we've had low clearance rates in our city that have recently been on the rise. So we want to see those continue to increase. The police, alongside a number of different other entities, who also play a vital role in this. I think our police department has done a good job over the last couple of years of getting the clearance rates up, but we are nowhere near where we need to be. More than half of the murders in Chicago still currently go unsolved, and I think that's a huge problem and a huge task at hand for the next police superintendent.
And what do you think the next city police superintendent should actually look like? What are the qualifications of the next top cop?
Yeah, they have a huge task at hand. So they need to have buy-in from the community. They need to have buy-in from rank and file officers, buy-in from the brass, obviously buy-in and work in collaboration with our commission and the new administration. But this needs to be a person who embraces change, a person who embraces the consent decree that our department is currently under, who views the consent decree as a floor and not a ceiling, and who seeks to collaborate with all of the different organizations on the ground here that are working to prevent violent crime. I think for too long, our department has been very siloed and has not worked very well with other organizations and entities throughout the city. I think that's going to be really important for our next leader to embrace change and help move our city forward.
The department obviously kind of responding the ways that, at least for decades, major metropolitan police departments really have responded. Officers obviously kind of showing that tact as well, but the world certainly is changing. We've seen that in the wake of many calls to have some sort of reform there in the criminal justice system. So what does that mean then for Chicago, for the police department? How do you enact changes? How will that leader focus their efforts?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, they have to put the consent decree at the forefront. They also have to put the community at the forefront. That's why our actual commission, was created back in July of 2021 by the Chicago City Council, was because there was such a lack of community voice when it came to policing in the city of Chicago. So now we need a new leader who will embrace that, a new leader who will work well with the community, a new leader who will, as I said before, embrace change, a person who is not afraid of the consent decree, a person who thinks that, we can go far beyond that. And really move our city in the direction that we needed to go in. I think it's a tough challenge. We're in a very polarized political climate. You have one group of folks who have a lot of distrust in the police. You have another group of folks who are very hardcore back to blue. And I think the vast majority of Chicagoans are probably somewhere in the middle. But we need a leader who can actually bring people together. That's the only way that we'll be able to solve these issues in our city.
Certainly going to take a lot of work from a lot of people on that aspect to be able to tackle some of the ongoing issues there. Now, I do understand from some of the comments that I heard on WGN radio, as well as in the Chicago Tribune, that you yourself were targeted. You were actually held up at gunpoint there in the city of Chicago. And as someone who has experienced that same something very similar, I've had a gun pointed at me on multiple occasions. Certainly a perspective changing experience, knowing that there are many people who have that same experience but then don't live to tell the tale. Kind of changes your life view on that. I was hoping you could maybe share a little bit about that experience there when you're robbed at gunpoint and your experience with the police department reporting that.
Yeah, so it was I have a very interesting perspective on it. I was coming home from work, working late. I got home and was going around from the back of my building where I parked to the front to retrieve a package from Amazon. And before I can even get to my front door, I was robbed by a group of teenagers, actually. And that actually, changed my perspective a lot, specifically on how our city deals with victims of violent crime. I think it was noteworthy that, my father was able to get there before the police department arrived. I obviously can't give you a time because they took my phone and I didn't have a watch on, so I wasn't able to actually calculate the time that it took. So that was initially pretty anchoring, but after actually talking to the officers who showed a lot of care and talking to the detectives who were working on my case, it was also very clear that they're very backlogged and that they're very busy, and they are actually working as hard as they can, but they are, they themselves are dealing with a lot. So it gave me the perspective not only as a victim who, it didn't feel great to wait an excessive amount of time for officers to arrive, but also the perspective of police officers who, at least in my case, seemingly wanted to help, but were so busy that they were not able to get to me as quickly as possible. So it really opened my eyes to what needs to happen as far as workforce allocation and making sure that response times are equitable across the board. When someone calls 911, they should be getting a response at least within 10 minutes, especially if it's a violent crime.
All right, Anthony, what's the next steps then in that process of selecting the new superintendent?
Yeah, so we have one more community engagement forum on May 22nd at the Beverly Arts Center. We've also been talking to a bunch of subject matter experts. We have recently unsealed the applications, began reviewing those, and we're whittling it down and figuring out who exactly are going to get interviews. We will begin interviews very shortly in the next 2 weeks and preparing to do background checks and getting a list, taking a formal vote and getting a list to Mayor Brandon Johnson before July 14th.
And my understanding is that started at some 52 applications kind of on the back end, and you maybe narrowed it down to around a dozen?
No, we haven't. We have not narrowed. There's no number yet. We're actually at 54 applications now, and we are in the process of narrowing it down now. But we don't have a number where it's currently narrowed down to. That'll take a vote from our commission.
No doubt there. Okay, Anthony Driver talking about this important search nearing an end there, getting ready to provide those nominations to the mayor of the city of Chicago for the next police chief. Superintendent there. Anthony Driver, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.